Oh boy, see, you know I can't have a series on pet food without discussing this topic right here. I'm talking about grain-free food. It started off as the be-all, end-all, cure-all for everything that ails your pet. And now there's some research that's finding that it could potentially be harmful. So where does it stand as of right now? Is it beneficial? Is it harmful? Let's jump into it. Roll that intro. When the whole grain-free food thing took over and wound up blowing itself up into a huge fad, yes, I'm calling it a fad, don't click off the video just yet, let me explain. Just about every single pet food commercial that you saw when you turned the TV on looked something like this. Cletus here was really starting to slow down. He had a really hard time getting around because of his arthritis, and his skin allergies were just terrible. I was starting to think that because of his age, there was nothing else that we could do to improve his quality of life. Here's what he used to look like. But just 1 week after getting him started on Nature's Naturals grain-free food, just look at him go. It's like he's a brand new dog. You almost can't even tell that he's a 27-year-old Shih Tzu. Thanks, Nature's Naturals. So if my memory serves me correctly, I want to say that the whole grain-free thing really took off around the time that the gluten fad in people became a big thing. That's often something that tends to happen where we end up having a new medical breakthrough in human medicine and we want to try to extrapolate that to our pets. Because a lot of times nowadays we really do treat our pets like our little family members, almost like our children, as if they were human. And so we have a natural tendency sometimes to want to care for them in the same ways that we care for ourselves, which is a perfectly good thing. But sometimes we really stretch to try to make the narrative fit. There was a brief moment there where people actually looked into gluten in dogs and cats, but as far back as you could look, as far as the research went, there was only one documented case back in the 80s with one genetic line of dog. I believe it was a Wheaten Terrier. I'll correct myself if I'm wrong, that actually had documentable celiac disease, which is what ties into gluten sensitivities in people. It was a silly idea to film out here. I'm going inside. It's currently a very brisk, chilly 109 degrees outside. Now, to be honest, looking into gluten sensitivities in dogs really wasn't that bad of an idea. And the reason being is that food allergies usually arise from an allergy to a protein source. Gluten is actually a protein that's found in certain types of grains. Now you can probably see where I'm going here because there's actually a very short distance to connect between going from a potential gluten allergy directly to a potential grain allergy since glutens are found in grains. So just stay with me here because from here it gets a little bit complicated. In the case of food allergies in dogs, one way to test for that food allergy is to change the protein source to something called a novel protein. So the idea of a novel protein diet means switching them over to a diet that has absolutely none of the protein ingredients that their previous diet had. That also includes the grains because the grains actually contain a little bit of protein such as gluten. Now because the grain-free diet has become so popular nowadays, the manufacturers prominently put that it's a grain-free food on the label of the food. So whenever the patient would improve from being on this novel protein diet, a lot of times the owner would completely forget that this entire diet was novel because the packaging so prominently says grain-free. And so it's very easy to draw the connection between the fact that it's grain-free and the fact that your pet did so much better. Now that the pet's suddenly feeling better, they might show other improvements in their quality of life, meaning that they may become more active. Now, if that pet is old and has arthritis, the owner may perceive this as this grain-free food has suddenly made my dog's arthritis better. If they've been underweight and their appetite suddenly increases because they feel better, they eat more and they gain weight. Or if they're obese or overweight, they may become more active, which helps them to lose weight, which then makes the owner think that the grain-free food is curing their obesity. The more people talk about this on the social circles, the more the idea of grain-free food being an overall healthier approach starts to sound more plausible. And so people start considering putting their pets on a grain-free food just because it's a healthier diet. Now, all the food companies see this happening and they're not dumb. So the next thing you know, everybody's turning out their own grain-free alternative, which then feeds back into the whole social acceptance of grain-free foods being just a naturally healthier diet. To circle back to the gluten-free fad in people, this same thing happened. I'd bet really good money that you or someone you know at some point in time has considered a gluten-free diet just because they want to eat healthier, whenever there is no scientific proof that a gluten-free diet is a healthier diet. It's only healthier if you have a gluten sensitivity or if you have celiac disease. Now all of a sudden there's some information coming out that may suggest that feeding your pet a grain-free food may actually be causing some harm. They're finding a link to a particular cardiac illness called DCM, or dilated cardiomyopathy, to patients that are on a grain-free food. Now, before I go any further, I want to make absolutely clear here that I am not advocating for or against grain-free foods. The fact of the matter is, there's absolutely no scientific evidence at this point in time that putting your pet on a grain-free food, if your pet does not have a diagnosed sensitivity to grains, is going to do anything to improve or change their quality of life whatsoever. There's also no conclusive evidence whatsoever that putting your pet on a grain-free food is going to cause these cardiac conditions in the future. The problem is that nowadays, especially with the prevalence of social media, whenever this gets out to the public, people automatically think that the information is factual. As of right now, current studies are showing that there is some link between certain patients who are on grain-free foods and this particular cardiac disease. But at this time, there is no evidence as to what in the grain-free food is potentially causing this situation. There was some concern in the beginning that there was some correlation between these grain-free foods and low concentrations of an amino acid called taurine, which is incredibly important in preventing dilated cardiomyopathy. But now there's some speculation that it may not be related to the taurine. They're also finding some correlation between the things that they use to supplement for grains in a grain-free food. A lot of times the things that they use to supplements are going to be root vegetables and legumes. So for instance, they may switch the carb source in these particular foods to things like potatoes or green beans or peas. As of the filming of this video, while some studies show the link between grain-free diets and a taurine deficiency in certain breeds, such as golden retrievers, other studies do show a correlation between dilated cardiomyopathy and a grain-free food, but they don't really know what about that grain-free food may be causing it or if it's causing it at all. Right now, the biggest correlation between this cardiac disease and grain-free foods is if the food is grain-free and if that particular food has peas and or lentils as an ingredient. Then maybe you should consider switching the foods. If your dog has a cardiac condition and they're on grain-free foods, you may want to discuss this with your veterinarian and consider switching foods. If your dog's breed has a history of cardiac disease, especially something like Doberman Pinschers, which are predisposed already to dilated cardiomyopathy, you may want to consider getting them off of the grain-free foods. If you want to be really proactive about this particular situation, especially if your dog is known to have a cardiac condition or if the breed is predisposed to a cardiac condition, I'm sure you can speak with your veterinarian about getting an echocardiogram performed or checking taurine levels in their blood. That's basically the information that we have at this very moment regarding this topic. This may change, and if any significant changes occur, I'll be sure to make a new video updating you on the changes. But here's the basic takeaway. Number one, grain-free foods are not the be-all end-all for any and everything that ails your pet. Some pets may benefit from it, but make sure you have a conversation with your veterinarian before you decide to switch to a grain-free food. Number two, there are some concerning findings in regards to cardiac disease and feeding your pet a grain-free food. But as of right now, there is no firm scientific evidence that links any specific ingredient in grain-free foods to these cardiac conditions. Studies are still underway, and hopefully over time we'll have more and better information for you. But until then, you may want to consider not switching to a grain-free food if you're concerned about your pet developing this in the future. Or if your pet is currently on a grain-free food, you may really want to consider speaking with your veterinarian about whether they should stay on the grain-free food or if you should try switching them to something else. So I'm really curious to see what people have to say at this point in time, and you need to keep in mind that studies are ongoing. And like I said before, as more information comes out, I will probably put a new video up with that new information. But until then, this is what we have to work with. So until next time, make sure you subscribe, turn on those notifications, and please don't forget to share. And I'll see you in the next video.